Okay, let's talk about AI and our jobs. You see the headlines everywhere, right? AI is coming, it's going to change everything, but what's actually happening on the ground right now? Well, we're going to dive into some brand new research that really cuts through all that noise and gives us some early clues.
So this is the big one. The question on everyone's mind is that massive wave of job displacement we keep hearing about. Is it already hitting us? It's what we all want to know. And let me tell you, the answer is way more interesting than a simple yes or no.
You know the drill. On one side, you've got the hype, all these headlines screaming about AI taking over. But here's the problem. We have a pretty bad track record with these kinds of predictions. Remember the forecasts about offshoring? They said a quarter of all US jobs were vulnerable. But a decade later, most of those jobs were doing just fine, growing even. So yeah, we need a much better way to track this stuff.
All right, to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to approach it like a detective story. First, we'll look at why we need a new way to investigate. Then, we'll introduce a new tool for finding clues. We'll map out AI's actual footprint, figure out who's most exposed, deliver the big verdict on unemployment, and we'll wrap up with a really important warning sign for young workers.
And so, our investigation begins. You see, the real challenge here isn't just about how powerful AI is, it's about figuring out how to measure what it's actually doing to the economy without getting sidetracked by everything else going on.
I mean, think about it. If unemployment ticks up, is that because of AI, or a recession, or maybe some new trade policy? When huge changes happened in the past, like the internet or a big shift in trade, it was always super hard to untangle the real cause. The old ways of measuring just couldn't isolate one thing from another. That's why we need a much sharper tool for this job.
And that brings us to our new high-tech magnifying glass. Researchers came up with a clever new metric they're calling observed exposure. And this thing is designed to give us a much clearer picture of what's happening in the real world.
So what exactly is observed exposure? Well, it's a really smart way to measure the risk that doesn't just look at what AI could do in a perfect world. The secret sauce is that it combines that theoretical potential with actual, hard data on how people are using these tools in their jobs right now. It's all about reality, not theory.
Here's how it works. It's a three-step process. First, they take about 800 different jobs and break them down into all the little individual tasks that make up that job. Step 2, they look at each task and ask, could an AI, like a large language model or LLM, theoretically make this task at least twice as fast? And then, step 3, and this is the game changer, they look at real-world data to see which of those tasks people are actually using AI to do. That last step is what makes this whole thing so powerful.
So now that we have this tool, we can start to map out where AI is truly leaving its mark. And the very first thing that jumps out is this huge gap between what AI can do and what people are actually doing with it.
And this chart just says it all. Take jobs in computers and math. In theory, AI could boost the speed of 94% of the tasks in these jobs. A huge number. But in reality, the observed exposure, what's actually happening, is only 33%. That is a massive gap between what's possible and what's practical today.
So why the huge gap? Well, it turns out the real world is complicated. You've got legal issues, companies that need very specific software, and a ton of tasks where you still need a human to double-check the AI's work, plus a million other little roadblocks. For instance, an AI could theoretically authorize a drug refill, but you don't actually see that happening because of all these real-world hurdles. Okay, so we know there's this gap between potential and reality. Now we can start to get specific. Which jobs and what kind of people are really on the front lines with the highest observed exposure as we speak?
The data points to a pretty clear top 3. Computer programmers are right at the top, with 75% coverage, which totally makes sense with all the AI coding assistants out there. Right behind them are customer service reps and data entry keyers. Again, no surprise, these are fields where automation is already a big deal.
But check this out. On the complete other side of things, a full 30% of workers have basically zero AI exposure right now. We're talking about jobs that are very physical or need you to be there in person. Think cooks, motorcycle mechanics, and bartenders. So whatever AI is doing, it's definitely not impacting everyone the same way.
So we know the jobs that are most in the thick of it. But what about the people in those jobs? When you start digging into the demographics of this highly exposed group, the picture that emerges is probably not what you're thinking.
First off, and this is a really surprising finding, the most exposed workers are actually higher earners. On average, they make 47% more than people in jobs with no AI exposure at all. We're not talking about low-wage jobs here. We're talking about well-paid, white-collar professions.
And the profile gets even more detailed. Compared to the unexposed group, these workers are way more likely to be female, almost twice as likely to be Asian, and a whopping 4 times more likely to have a graduate degree. This just completely flips the old story that automation is all about lower-skilled male-dominated jobs.
All right, we've identified the jobs and the people who are most exposed. So now it's time for the million-dollar question. Are these people actually losing their jobs? Let's see what the verdict is from the unemployment data.
And here it is, the big takeaway. Despite all the fear, all the hype, the data shows absolutely no systematic increase in unemployment for these highly exposed jobs since late 2022. That's right around when tools like ChatGPT really took off.
In fact, if you put the unemployment rates for the most exposed and least exposed groups on a chart, the two lines run almost perfectly parallel. There's no split, no spike for the group on the front lines of AI. The trend lines are sticking together. At least, for now.
But hold on, the investigation isn't quite over. Because while there aren't any signs of mass layoffs, the data does show us something else. A more subtle, kind of hidden clue. And it's a warning sign, especially for younger people just starting their careers.
So, if experienced workers aren't getting fired, could AI be impacting the job market in a totally different way? Is there some other effect we've been missing by just staring at unemployment numbers?
And it looks like the answer is yes. The data shows that for young folks, those between 22 and 25 years old, the rate of finding a new job in one of these highly exposed fields has dropped by 14% since 2022. This suggests AI's first big impact might not be firing people, but actually slowing down the hiring of new people for entry-level jobs.
So where does that leave us? Well, the story so far is pretty nuanced. There are no mass layoffs yet, but we are seeing what looks like a potential hiring freeze for the next generation in some key fields. The first clues are on the table, but believe me, this investigation is just getting started. The real question is, as this technology keeps getting better and more companies start using it, what is the data going to reveal next?